revolution in which you love your enemy. You don't have a revolution in which you are begging the system of exploitation to integrate you into it. Revolutions overturn systems. Revolutions
Since Malcolm came on the scene and stood up in such a courageous way, he's become the symbol for anybody that's talking about freedom.
To hear a man, talking about people's right to defend themselves, it's like it was unheard of. It's like who said that you can defend yourself?
You brought us over here as slaves. You're gonna keep us here, and you're mad because we want some of our own? Why don't we just take everything that belongs to us?
Just because you're a white person who like hip hop, don't mean we free.
There's a lot going on. It's supposed to be a movement going on. And not too many people are moving. I don't understand it.
What Malcolm was able to do, each and every person has the capacity to do. The question is, do we have the desire?
Because we know this truth and we're willing to teach it, it's a great threat to the system of white supremacy that has them chosen and has us cursed.
He was dangerous because, like Christ, he was raising them up by empowering them and giving them the passion to live. And that's what he did for me, and that's what I love the brother for, and that's what I thank him for.
I may be dead and gone, but one day, enough of us will turn things around.
But what they didn't understand is that you cannot kill a spirit of a people's yearning for freedom, which existed before Malcolm X. He was a courageous man. He knew the forces of imperialism, colonialism would kill him if he stand up to free his people. But he had no choice. And he stood and they killed him. But what they didn't understand is that you cannot kill a spirit of a people's yearning for freedom, which existed before Malcolm X, and was only embodied by Malcolm because of the circumstances of his life and the training he got from his family and from the elders who prepared him to be a leader and a teacher of his people.
Malcolm's echo is one which resonates globally as a voice of a messenger no bullets could silence. Every year since his assassination in 1965, the Organization of African American Unity have led a pilgrimage to his grave in remembrance of his life's work. Why is Malcolm X as important today as he was back then? His echo reverberates a cry from beyond the grave for Africans around the world to unite.
My name is James Small, born in America, of enslaved Africans from the United States of America, probably family from all over West Africa. Met Malcolm when I was 16 years old, went in the military when I was 18, so I didn't get to see him again. He was assassinated while I was in France. Upon my return to this country, I went to his organization and rejoined. And within 2 weeks, I was the personal bodyguard to his sister. Within 6 months, I was the imam over the mosque, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. Within another 6 months, I was a board member of the Organization of African American Unity. In 1975, I went and made my pilgrimage to the city of Mecca and became a Hajj. And I'm also the coordinator of the Malcolm X Day pilgrimage to Malcolm's grave.
Each year I come out and I go to Malcolm X's grave because I honor him greatly. As a matter of fact, he enlightened us as to what happened to us during our time here.
Because Professor Small is so important to the Malcolm X legacy, I was naturally recruited, and I've been here doing this for 20 years. So now I'm an organizer, from a pilgrim to an organizer. We are concerned about the greater black folks, and that we have a direction that we want to follow, and it's in the pages of Malcolm X's speeches and Malcolm X's life.
And that was Malcolm's mission, to make sure your human rights wasn't denied. And so as our people cry now freedom or death, Malcolm said,
that death was one of those paths you had to follow. And at 39 years old, he made the ultimate sacrifice. He died that we might live. And don't ever forget that Malcolm X died that we might live free.
Sun is still out. It's a beautiful day. Definitely. The African apartheid made my heart cry, cause our ancestors died to manifest us. We gon' make it through the silent storm while we all can get along. Life is what you make it, don't get stuck in the matrix.
The easiest way to describe Malcolm is as a Pan-Africanist and a nationalist. Nationalism means that you own and control economic, politics, and culture in the communities you live in. You own the land. You own the businesses. You control the police. You are the police. You control the schools that educate your children so that it educates them in the manner and culture you want. You know, you decide how your dollar is spent and how it is reinvested. You decide how your tax money is used in your community. Pan-Africanism means you must have a relationship around economic, politics, and culture with Africans everywhere else in the world, on the continent, in the Caribbean, in Europe, in Latin America, and Asia, that you must have a working relationship built around economic, politics, and culture. So those are the best ways to describe what he was talking about and what he tried to implement before he was killed.
I look at Harlem as Malcolm X's living room. You understand, in the picture where he's standing there holding the gun by the window looking out. This is how Malcolm is overseeing Harlem right now. This is like his living room. And if you don't show respect, you must walk through that door and leave this house.
I always say that knowledge is strength. I don't believe knowledge is power. Knowledge is strength. Wisdom is power. The application of your knowledge and the timing of it is the most important facet. Malcolm's development was an interesting background. He had the mother and father, Louise and Earl Little. So he's actually born Malcolm Little, Omaha, Nebraska, in 19th of May 1925. Both his parents were members of the UNIA. His father is a Back to Africa Garveyite preacher, and his mother as a secretary. He loses his father to the Black Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, age 4.
But then when the father was killed and later the mother was institutionalized, that foundation began to crack. And then the vulnerability of Malcolm began to show, and the rest of the system, the larger system, began to take its toll. And so he fell into what I call the European American formation. And his schooling and his programming now becomes the out of the European experience.
It leads eventually to him going to delinquency. He becomes known as Harlem Red. So Malcolm was Harlem Red as a delinquent. That later, we see him here. He later became known as Detroit Red, where he got into his burglary gang, hustling. He was doing into selling drugs, taking drugs, doing whatever. This is in the 1940s.
Malcolm X went through various different things in his lifetime. He started off as a young man, growing up, not really knowing exactly who he was, but he started his journey. That's what made him end up in Mecca in an enlightenment state. You understand? So it's a process that everybody must take, and that's definitely one person we could look up to for sure, especially inner city youth who feel they are poverty-struck and they have no hope.
And so the drugs, the gambling, the prostitution, and all the rest of that took hold. And he was imprisoned. But in the prison, this awakened spirit that he has and this brightness, which is his natural inheritance, took control. And he was an avid reader, reading the encyclopedia, the dictionaries, etc. He was perfecting himself.
One of his brothers was a member of the Nation of Islam, and then eventually his redemption comes through the contact with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the teachings of Farad Muhammad, and that gives him the structure that his life didn't have. In fact, Elijah Muhammad, he says, became like his father, a father figure. And so he entered the family called the Nation of Islam.
Immediately, it instilled within me such a high degree of racial pride and racial dignity that I wanted to be somebody, and I realized that I couldn't be anybody by begging the white man for what he had, but that I had to get out here and try and do something for myself or make something out of myself.
He got to a point where he realized the religion and the leaders that he was following had the same power that he had. He always idolized these people, but then he got to a level where he realized it was a balance. We're equal. And that's what he wanted to build. That's what he wanted to build. We're all one.
This street is 116th Street, and this is the street that Malcolm held court. He had this restaurant on the street, barber shop, meat market, fish market, mosque, and this was the Muslim headquarters, really, for the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. Well, before Malcolm, you didn't have a black consciousness movement or an African consciousness movement. You didn't have a black as natural movement. You did not have black people talking about we are Africans. You did not have the African community abroad reaching towards the Africans in the diaspora. You didn't have black people struggling around their identity. Before Malcolm, you didn't have people fighting in the streets and on campuses to have African studies taught in universities and in the public school system. Some of these things had been raised in earlier time by the Honorable Marcus Garvey and others, but it had been a decade since any of these issues had been the center of a movement.
I refer to this period of the last 50 or 60 years as the Malcolm X era, the era where African people have been able to map out their destiny and plan their future and then mobilize around that. And so Malcolm has been an enormous inspiration to all of us, several generations.
And to hear a man, you know, talking about people's right to defend themselves, you know, it's like, it was unheard of, you know. It's like, who said that you can defend yourself, you know? I mean, based on what, you know? How dare you, you know? And talking about black is beautiful, you know, when we'd all been straightening our hair and, you know, bleaching our skin, and, you know, it's just everything except self-love, you know. So to hear that, you know, was life-altering, to say the least. So that's the impact, the initial impact that Malcolm had on me.
He invited me to come to the mosque to hear him speak. And I did on a Sunday, and they reserved a seat for me, and all the way up front. And I wasn't about to be up front, and I went in the back. They came and got me. They set me up front again, and I left again. They set me in the third row. Finally, I sat in the third row. And Malcolm came out, and he began speaking. He spoke about white folks so hard, so bad, so mean. I had never heard any black man speak about the white man in that way. And I started looking around to see who was watching me. And Malcolm pointed his finger at me and said, "Don't be scared." And I jumped and said, "Oh, Lord." You know, it's crazy.
The white man today will tell you that thousands of years ago, the black man in Africa was living in palaces. The black man in Africa was wearing silk. The black man in Africa was cooking and seasoning his food. The black man in Africa had mastered the arts and the sciences. He knew the course of the stars in the universe before the man up in Europe knew that the earth wasn't flat. Is that right or wrong?
Parts and parcel of his involvement of Malcolm X was that he took a wife, Betty Sharp. She herself, sharp sister, a doctor, powerful sister, like his mother was powerful.
I became very close friends with his wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz, and remained a close friend until she passed away. I think that everything rests on who the woman is. And actually Malcolm said something in one of his talks about when he was traveling throughout Africa, and he was referencing those societies that were not oppressive to their women were the most progressive, the most productive ones.
Within the context of African culture, there's no big woman, little man, little woman. The whole African culture is predicated on harmony and balance. The Yoruba say Ewapile. In ancient Kemet, we say Ma'at. In the Igbo, we say Omanela. We're talking about harmony and balance within and without. Without mean within your social construct.
Well, the woman's role is to educate the children, because the children what they learn from home is what they take into the world. And you have to be there to make sure they have complete meals, constructive meals. They have bedtimes, that you read to them, that they know how to write, and they know how to, their culture. Our culture is what we've been robbed of, which is why we're in the conditions that we're in. We're in a decadent society, and until we know who we are, we're never going to know where we're going. So you have to teach that from birth. You have to teach that from a baby, and that's the mother's role. We are the caregiver. And there's nothing wrong with being suited and booted and being about black power, because I'm a soldier no matter what. But at the same time, I got to take care of my children, take care of my man, take care of my home. That should come from every woman. But, it's something we have to teach. It's my responsibility to teach who don't know. Each one teach one.
We can't have a society that's progressive or forward-thinking without very strong, powerful men. And we have to raise men who are not afraid of powerful, strong women.
And so the role our women have to play is the same role that men have to play. Build the African character so that you can build the African family, so that you can build the African nation, so that you can rebuild an African civilization. That's based on principles that promote human development and not principles that exploit humans' development. Just across the street to the right, that's the mosque number 7, where Malcolm X taught all the years he was in Harlem. That mosque was set afire right after his assassination by Malcolm's people in retaliation for his assassination. Now, the mosque is now an Orthodox Muslim mosque, and the community was headed by the son of Elijah Muhammad, Wallace Dean Muhammad.
After he finishes with the Nation of Islam, he becomes this internationally renowned speaker. He actually spoke at Oxford University, but then he was becoming more politically astute the way that he went on.
So he began to globalize our condition and talk about human rights, and then take it to the highest levels of authority, such as the UN, to put our plight on the world, on the table of the world.
His consciousness was expanding. He kept his cultural integrity. However, he wasn't, to me, he was evolving with his understanding of what was going on in the world. His assassination came, as I said, too young in his life.
I live like a man who is dead already. I have no fear whatsoever of anybody or anything.
We were friends from the day we met until his death. I went into that bathroom, and it was after dinner, and just cried like a child for 15 minutes. And I came out partly composed and made the speech that night I was asked to make, and came on home and began to try to deal with the reality of the situation.
Dr. Shabazz was thrust into the limelight, having been widowed at a very early age with 4 children and twins on the way. She was pregnant with her twins when Malcolm was assassinated.
He enlightened so many people in a short lifespan and exceeded levels that people didn't expect from a young man coming from this type of environment with the education and the experience that he had.
People were so afraid there would be shootings and shootouts that nobody wanted to bury him, would funeralize him. So the church, Charles Memorial, did the funeral, and then Unity Funeral Home handled the body. And so it's an important symbol because of what they did for Malcolm. And the last time I saw Dr. Betty Shabazz, a few weeks before her death, I saw her at this church where we would celebrate Malcolm's birthday every year.
She totally admired him. She talked about how she was so thankful to God that she met him, because, he just expanded her consciousness in ways that she couldn't imagine that it could happen without him. So, I think everyone is still looking for a Malcolm, in some way or another.
So Malcolm was very special because he was a young man, 39, because he loved his people enough to die for them. The same thing Christians said Jesus did, Malcolm did, in our time, for our sake.
To me, Malcolm X was not gone, and he's still not gone in my imagination.
I'm going to take you now, before it gets dark, I want to take you by the Audubon ballroom where Malcolm was assassinated.
No, I'm not an American. I'm one of the 22 million black people who are the victims of Americanism. One of the 22 million black people who are the victims of democracy. Nothing but disguised hypocrisy.
His wife did fight very hard to get part of it retained as a historical site where her husband's assassination could be remembered.
It's a great time, you know, to be living in Harlem, in the place where he worked. He didn't live here. He actually lived in Queens, but he spent so much time working and organizing in Harlem, and to actually be able to walk down the streets and actually run into people who knew him, you know, who worked with him.
That green building is the Audubon, and Malcolm was killed in that building on February 21st, 1965. And the building across the street is the hospital where he was taken after he was shot, the Presbyterian Hospital, and there he was pronounced, of course, dead, because he was probably dead before leaving the Audubon Ballroom. It will be officially inaugurated this May 19, 2006, by the daughter Ilyasah, Shabazz, and her sisters.
First, from the family, we would like to have a welcome from Aisha, Ilyasah Shabazz.
Thank you for your continued support and presence here this evening to join us on the 81st birthday salute for our father, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz Malcolm X, and the inauguration of the educational program for Manhattan's newest cultural institute, the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Educational Center.
Just a little bit about the mural upstairs, which I think is probably one of the most dynamic pieces. It was made by a Mexican-American artist named Daniel Galvez. It's called Homage to Malcolm X and kind of chronicles the life and times of Malcolm X.
Our mother was determined to transform the Audubon Ballroom from a site of sorrow, the place of the tragic assassination or martyrdom of her husband, right over there in that space, to a place of triumph that would attest to the significance of his life and work.
My personal problem is never solved as long as the problem is not solved for all of our people in this country. So I remain Malcolm X as long as there is a need to protest and struggle and fight against the injustices that our people are involved in this country.
Have Malcolm. That's a piece they can't take away. And we know Malcolm was assassinated primarily because of his opposition to America's involvement in Africa and because he was trying to link African Americans with the continent of Africa so that we could form the kind of Pan-African Union we are now seeing. But all of what you see here, the restaurants and the cafeteria, none of that was here.
When Malcolm came out on stage and he sat down in the chair and he put a piece of paper in the chair and then picked it up and said, "Make it plain." Make it plain was a signal that Malcolm always used when someone was warming up for him to let them know that he's ready to come to the rostrum. And so after Malcolm said, "Make it plain," Benjamin said, "I'll bring you a brother, who will lay down his life for you, Brother Minister Malcolm X." He came to the stage. He said, "Assalamu alaikum." At the moment he said that, the guy in the 6th row on the left-hand side said, "Nigga, get your hand out of my pocket."
The largest system had shown that it feared Malcolm X. He was almost poisoned in Cairo. He was poisoned in Cairo, but he survived. The French said that they did not want him to land in Paris because the word was out that he was on the target list of those people in power who wished to crush black people. So Malcolm sacrificed his life, and he was willing to do it. He knew what the end would be. But so he's a courageous black shining prince, and we resurrect his spirit in our people all the time.
So the United States government saw that Malcolm had the ability to influence African leaders at the OAU. That's why he named his organization the OAAU, after the OAU, and that the African leaders at that time, far more revolutionary, had a greater sense of integrity and character than many of the leaders in present-day Africa, was going to involve themselves in our particular struggle. And so at that point, he sealed his death to be assassinated, or sealed his fate to be assassinated by the United States government.
So we know that Malcolm's killers, when he was assassinated that day, came out this way. There was an entrance here on the old building. But 2 men were attacked by the crowd. The police took one and he disappeared. One they managed to hold. He's in prison. And so we know that the police was in on Malcolm's assassination. We know that the FBI was in on his assassination. We know that the CIA was in his assassination, as well as organized crime. Because if Malcolm took the black community away from organized crime and gave it to the black people, you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar enterprise leaving one hand going to another. Would you kill over that?
42 years after the assassination of Malcolm X, his thoughts, philosophies and actions still echo within the works of activists, scholars and everyday people. The principles he upheld endure beyond the streets of Harlem and reverberate in movements worldwide, from the hip-hop movement to people fighting for freedom, equality and justice.
Right here was Pam Pam's until about 2 years ago. And this is what Dr. Ben, if you didn't find him at home, this is where here he comes. This is where you can find him. You see him?
I wrote 42 books, and my thoughts are in my 42 books.
Can you just be quiet for 1 second?
But I'm not stupid.
I'm not saying that, sir. All I'm asking you to do is be quiet
now
for
what
1
are you
second.
saying? What are you
I
saying?
said, this is a giant.
Yes, I know that. But what are you saying?
Are you gonna
okay, everybody know Dr. Ben.
No. I got involved the first day I came. I thought it was injustice, and I couldn't avoid it.
I was born here. I describe myself as an African born in America.
I'm here by default. It just happens to be where my mother dropped me out.
Okay, all right. Where they dropped your ancestors off the boat. That's right.
I know Malcolm X at 128th Street from the time he was Big Reddy, when he was not in the movement. Then when he got out of being Big Reddy and went to the movement, I knew him until the day he got shot.
Every museum you go to, you see us, and they're showing you how they've conquered us and try to make us subhuman beings. But they come from us. So every time they try and destroy us, they destroy themselves.
Chickens have come home to roost.
Chickens are here
already.
Chickens
have come home to roost. That's right. And they're roosting.
You can't sit down and enjoy the struggle. You have to become involved in it, however you can.
Anytime you beg another man to set you free, you will never be free. Freedom is something that you have to do for yourselves.
What price are you talking about?
The price of freedom is death.
look ahead, the white building atop the trees, that's the Teresa Hotel. You know, once Malcolm left the Nation of Islam, that hotel became his headquarters. And that's the hotel where he had the meeting with Fidel Castro. A big part of his teachings was to make it clear to African people that the philosophy that guide the ruling white elite in the world and their economic interests is a philosophy of white supremacy. And that philosophy is fundamentally anti-African at its core. And that you must be prepared to resist that with words or with blows.
We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
And he articulated that very clearly, that our right to self-defense was a human right, and if anyone violated that right, you had to defend yourself by any means necessary. But he wasn't just talking about picking up guns. Any means mean get yourself trained, get yourself skilled, get yourself tooled, get yourself educated.
To be literate, to be articulate is to be African. But what has happened for many of our youth is the promotion of this, what I refer to as the ignorant Negro syndrome. And that is, it's hip to create your own language. It's hip to talk and say, like, you know what I'm saying? But if you can't communicate on a basic level, you can't move through the world. Most of our young people are confined in a mental ghetto. They think that their hood, their neighborhood, is their world. It's a microcosm of the universe that they were born to inherit. But if they limit themselves to the worst part of the world, then they will never be able to become true citizens of the world and attain dominion over that which is theirs by their birthright.
We suffer, a distortion of reality that's forced upon us by being forced into an educational system that teaches an anti-African philosophy and force the African to accept an anti-African philosophy in order to be acculturated within that society, so that you can then impose the rules of the oppressor on yourself and reduce the amount of manpower he needs to keep you oppressed. We're denied development in the three primary areas: economic, politics, and culture. And if you deny development in those areas by the state and by the majority group, who happen in these both cases to be white, then you cannot provide the food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security needed for your family. If you cannot do that, then your families are going to disintegrate and become self-destructive. The key thing in African culture to remember that you are your ancestors. Africans don't operate around the Judeo-Islamic Christian concept or Judaic concept or Muslim concept of death. The African culture says we are our ancestors returned. And the reason you reverend and pay respects to your great ancestors so you can restore your memory to now. When we come into this world, we're pretty much a blank, except in our deep subconscious. But education in the African context comes from the inside out, but it must be stimulated from the outside in order to bring what's in there from the inside out. And so you return to your ancestors, especially those who have set great examples like Malcolm, so that you can remember who you are. And that tells you what your responsibilities are. And once you know what your responsibilities are, you know what your destiny is. And the rest is up to you to perform your duty with the dignity and the principle and with the type of character that will allow you to have victory.
Today is the Earth Day of Malcolm X. And what it means to me is that he will never die. He will always be alive, and we celebrate his life by going to his gravesite, giving thanks and praise to his legacy, and keeping his legacy alive within the new Black Panther Party, because we're about the same things Malcolm was, which is revolution, complete constructive change, and being for the people, for the black people.
Black power, y'all. Black power. Come on.
Like, oh, that's right, hold it back.
We have weekly meetings, just basically being in the streets with these young brothers and sisters. Every day, we also have a Youth Alliance program that meets. We try to take these black babies in the worst parts of the city and teach them who they are. It's not common for, like, especially a young black woman to know how to take care of themselves or their family.
And these sisters have to take care of their man, you know what I mean? We have to get behind these black men. They can't do it by themselves. And if they got to come home to us with chaos and all this animosity, it's going to be even harder when they got to go out there and deal with this decadent society. We have to stand behind your man, queens.
Now that I have the independence of action, it's my intention to work with everybody or against everybody, whatever the case may be, to try and get some kind of immediate solution to the problems that are confronting our people.
I was selling your Malcolm X CD because I make it for my students. They don't understand the essence of what Malcolm was about, and that's the idea that we have to move towards nationhood. Anyway, Rudy, we got to move towards African nationalism and Pan-Africanism, and that's essentially the legacy that we have to inherit, because unfortunately, so many people my age and younger don't, you know, they think he's militant and all these different things, but don't get the point.
Malcolm's speeches have never gone out of publication. Two things, his autobiography and the collection of his speeches. This is the source of education in our community. But it's about the black community keeping alive this knowledge about one of its major heroes.
Dr. King, for example, has been embraced by Europeans because he presents a more palatable persona of African Americans. He makes the European Americans very comfortable because he talks about inclusion of all people, all races, all nationalities. He talked about the day in which all of God's children, black men and brown men, red men and yellow men, could hold hands together and sing the words, free at last, free at last. And that's an ideology that I probably won't live to see in my lifetime, but it's one that can be used to make Europeans feel very good. So as Dr. Asa Hilliard has said, Europeans have embraced Martin and have reduced him to one speech and 4 words, I have a dream. And most children are essentially taught the I have a dream speech, and they know very little about the movement that Martin played a pivotal role in leading, who shaped his thinking. Malcolm, on the other hand, was an uncompromising revolutionary, one who felt that it was better for him to work outside of the American mainstream. Coming from the Nation of Islam, which was a fiercely independent organization, Malcolm didn't have to worry about biting his tongue in order to keep the dollars coming in to maintain the organization. So he was free to say what most of the civil rights leaders dared to say. And as a result, Malcolm was symbolically diametrically opposed to the image of Martin Luther King. Whereas Dr. King promoted integration, Malcolm talked about independence.
When Malcolm was alive, he didn't speak at big concert halls. He spoke out in the community. He was the only leader who could come out and stand out on the middle of Harlem, and there'd be 10,000 people would gather to hear him.
You can't compare your skin with his skin. Why, your skin looked like gold beside his skin.
Malcolm was extraordinary only because we paid attention to him, because he was observable. There probably were people who were even greater and more extraordinary that we don't know about. You know, the David Walker, the Nat Turner, the Denmark Vesey, the Kojo, the Nani, the Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the Toussaint Louverture, Amanatu of Nigeria, the Mahdi of Sudan. They have been equally great men and women all over the African world, doing the same thing that Malcolm did long before Malcolm, and Malcolm studied them so that he might emulate them and began to imitate them so that he can innovate on the knowledge he got from them for his time.
What makes the so-called Negro unable to stand on his own 2 feet? He has no self-confidence. He has no proud confidence in his own race, because the white man destroyed your and my past, destroyed our knowledge of our culture. And by having destroyed it, now we don't know we have any achievements, any accomplishments. And as long as you can be convinced that you never did anything, you can never do anything.
The Europeans here in the United States of America have co-opted, borrowed, stolen, modified various aspects of African architecture, symbolism, mythology, and philosophy, and incorporated them into specific buildings such as the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial, or even the White House. This park is Meridian Hill Park, also known as Malcolm X Park. The park has a great deal of symbolic significance. There's also a great deal of comedic imagery in this park, as well as symbolism. Behind me is the cascading waterfall, which is one of the most significant aspects of this park. This is the largest cascading waterfall in the United States. If you add the shape of the 13 cascading pools to the horizontal shape of the reflection pool, they form a cross. And if you look above the cross, you'll see a semicircular arch. And if you add that to the cross, it forms an ankh, the ancient Kemetic symbol of life. And if you look on either side of the circular portion of the ankh, you'll see a pair of tekenu. There's one on the left and there's one on the right. And so wherever you find a pair of tekenu together, the one on the left represents yesterday, the one on the right represents tomorrow, and the space in the center symbolizes today. If you look over my shoulder off into the distance, you can see the Washington Monument, which we know as a result of our study of ancient Kemetic history is really a replica of a Tekken, a 6,000-year-old symbol which represents the resurrection of a Tsar. So this park, the landscape of the park, some of the sculpture in the park, contains information that would provide an informed viewer with basic information about how to negotiate life here on planet Earth. We too can harness this energy and use it to unlock our spiritual power so that we can achieve the work that we were born here at this point in time and at this place in time in order to continue the legacy of our ancestors.
Let me tell you something, and I'll tell you why you say we hate white people. We don't hate anybody. We love our own people so much they think we hate the ones who are inflicting injustice against them.
He was the embodiment of the spirit of freedom in black people everywhere around the world. It seems as if we've forgotten that we weren't always the victims of these oppressions now. You know, it's sad that when you grow up being Latino or grow up being black that you think your history starts as a slave. And it starts way before that. It starts before European history starts. And you grow up with no knowledge of that.
Just that level of attack on white people, you know, is so inspiring and so beautiful to see and so liberating, you know. An incredibly important figure in my life personally, and definitely I think in all of my generation.
My father went to many of his rallies when he was a younger man, and my father was also present the unfortunate day that Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom.
This generation, the hip-hop generation, and the whole notion of hip-hop nation, which is a nationalist concept, a black nationalist concept, is reproducing Malcolm's ideas and spirit. They have been very important in pushing him forward.
You know, he is a brother who's really learned to master the English language. You know what I mean? Because people had been fed the imagery of black people as ignorant and stupid in America.
So we are within our rights and with justice, with justification, when we express doubt concerning the ability of the white man to solve our problem, and also when we express doubt concerning his integrity, concerning his sincerity. Because you will have to confess that the problem has been around here for a long time, and whites have been saying the same thing about it for the past 100 years, and it's no nearer a solution today than it was 100 years ago.
Here you had a well-articulated black man who could punish you in a verbal argument. And here you have, you know, black and Latino people in hip-hop that have such a mastery of the language that not only can they express their sentiment and talk about the hood and talk about the ghetto, but that whole shit is gonna rhyme. And it's gonna sound hot over a beat. That was the birth of hip-hop.
The hip-hop people surely are the strong voice. There's a progressive voice and there's a reactionary voice, so you must make the difference.
During a certain period in the 80s into the early 90s, we had a very conscious movement within hip-hop where very prominent artists were espousing views on black nationalism and, you know, just basically uplifting the race. You know, groups like Public Enemy, KRS-One, X-Clan, you know, Paris, and many other groups had positive messages, many of which were inspired and influenced by the words and thoughts of Malcolm.
To me, he represented revolution in every aspect, you know, not just in terms of religion, but in terms of culture, because for a long time, we were always begging and pleading for something. That's why a lot of people, you know, respect Malcolm X so much in hip-hop, because hip-hop is from another generation.
The first music video I directed was for an artist by the name of KRS-One, and the song was called My Philosophy, and I do believe it was probably the first conscious video, if you will. And I remember when I met with KRS-One to discuss the music video, the album, which was titled By All Means Necessary, was an image of KRS-One, kind of a recreation of the famous image of Malcolm X with the rifle in his hand as he peeked out the window. KRS was holding an Uzi peeking out the window.
They schools can't teach us shit. My people need freedom. We trying to get all we can get. All my high school teachers can suck my dick, telling me white man lies, straight bullshit. You saying schools ain't.
I mean, in terms of hip-hop now, it's not really a very revolutionary moment. You know, I mean, a lot of people aren't really getting very far being political. I mean, Dead Prez is very political. Immortal Technique is very political, but he's very underground. Right now, hip-hop really lacks the political spine that it had in the 80s when so many of us fell in love with it, so.
At the time when I was approached by MTV to host Yo MTV Raps, I, as many other black people and many other people that were aware, were conscious of the fact that MTV was not really representing black music, black culture, and so the fact that MTV was almost on some musical apartheid. I remember people asking me at the time, did I think the video would be on MTV? And I was like, look, fool, don't you know that MTV doesn't really play black music with the exception of Michael Jackson or Prince? That was it was a revolution. I mean, change is possible and change does happen.
If you're looking for the music industry to provide political options, you know, political solutions, I don't know why you would do that. You're a little crazy to do that. I mean, they're not here to educate. They're here to entertain. They're here to get money. Their job is not to inform. If they can educate and or inform and get money, then they'll do that. Young white men aren't looking for black rappers who are, you know, the next Malcolm X, the next, you know, Huey Newton, you know, so that's not what we're getting.
Young men in the music industry and now young men on the street referring to their mothers, their sisters, their wives, and their daughters as bitches. A word that in the English dictionary I think refers to a dog, or to watch the African young men across the world referring to themselves as dogs. You're my dog, yo, what's happening, dog? The self-demeaning of now calling themselves niggers, a word that was used in North America to denigrate Africans. Just those labelings of ourselves and denigrating ourselves, the self-denigration that we carry on in the last 2 decades is a great sign of post-slavery trauma.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other.
Be true to yourself. Be true to your ideals, whatever they may be. I mean, that's a brother that, I mean, he went all out for knowledge of self. But this is the house, 34-58, 110th Street. And I believe it's on the first floor they stayed. And this is where his family stayed and until he was killed.
Especially when I was in middle school, like 12, 13 years old. Like Spike Lee did his movie, and everybody was like rocking Malcolm X. And to me, because of that, it recreated like a sense of pride amongst my generation to be able to see his story.
The youth of today, the first responsibility is to submit to respecting elders and ancestors, to study your history so you can know where you're going, and for them to understand that you cannot profane your woman or profane your elders without profaning yourself. And if you've profaned yourself, you've already passed the first blow against you for your enemy. And so the best thing for the youth of today to do is what the youth of yesterday did, and the youth of even more ancient time did, that is study their history so they can know, like Dr. Clark says, where they are on the map of the world. Knowing yesterday will help you plan and determine your tomorrow. Anyone that does not know their yesterday can't possibly plan for tomorrow. And Dr. Martin Luther King says, anyone who has failed to plan have planned to fail.
If you're thinking like a nigger, thinking like a homeboy, that's the consciousness that is constantly going to stream into your mind from the universe using this melanated antenna, using your pineal gland. You're going to tap into nigger consciousness, and there's a lot of nigger consciousness out here. Hoe consciousness, gangster consciousness, bitch consciousness. There's also consciousness of Malcolm, Mary McLeod Bethune, Carter G. Woodson, Imhotep, Queen Nzinga. Their consciousnesses are also out here, waiting for us to tune our thinking to theirs, so that their spirit can flow into us and through us, and they will live again based on the things that we say and do.
This is the house he lived in that was firebombed with he and his wife and children inside that barely escaped with their lives. This is that famous house. It's been slightly restored.
I was in a house last night that was by my own. It isn't something that made me lose confidence in what I'm doing, because my wife understands and I have children. Even in their young age, they understand. I think they would rather have a father who will take a stand in the face of any kind of reaction from narrow-minded people.
Be in a community where we have 40 to 50% unemployment in our population, particularly the male population, and then to have the employed population spend their monies in other ethnic communities, stores, and industry that won't even hire their unemployed husband, daughter, sister, or brother. Does that make any sense to anybody who's trying to survive? You won't hire my daughter, you won't hire my son, you won't hire my husband, but I do have a job because I happen to be working for government, but I'm going to spend my money with you anyway, with no demands on you. And you can take my money and go back and build your community. And I don't even understand how that works.
That's another aspect of warfare against African people. You use the things that you know we're going to gravitate towards to destroy us. And specifically, you target the youth so that they will never have the opportunity to cultivate their minds or their bodies to become productive citizens of the world. So we have to be very conscious of the fact that everything we do either moves us closer to our liberation or closer to mental, physical, or spiritual enslavement.
And so the family is the very basis for civilization. You can't build civilization without a family. You can't build a nation without a family. You can't build a community without a family. And a family involves the parents, the youth, the elders, and the ancestors. And when the youth understand that they're nothing but tomorrow for the elders, and the elders was nothing but yesterday for the youth, and without a tomorrow and without a yesterday, presence can't even exist. But if they understand that, the youth will know what their responsibility is, and that is to submit and subordinate themselves to the wisdom of the ancestors, and let that wisdom instruct them on how they should behave around things ethical, morally, and principally. anytime you raise Malcolm in the black community, anywhere in the world, people stand up with a respect and a regard, because Malcolm lived a principle life. He spoke principles and he lived those principles. When he said he believed something, he acted on his belief.
My personal economic philosophy is also black nationalism, which means that the black man should have a hand in controlling the economy of the so-called Negro community. He should be developing the type of knowledge that will enable him to own and operate the businesses and thereby be able to create employment for his own people, for his own kind.
All an African has to do is look around and see if the world's equal. And unless they're insane or have a gun at their head, it doesn't take 2 seconds to see the world is not equal. The greatest means of manipulation is economic dominance and military threats. And so what the West have done is amass all of these sophisticated high-tech weaponry and all of these sophisticated and well-trained military organizations, and they use that to intimidate people. And by controlling the economic system of the world and how it works, it then controls the economic system of the people who they refer to as developing nations. And with their military, they control the natural resources in the land.
The African burial ground is probably the most important archaeological find of the 20th century. It is the oldest marker of our presence in cities, probably in the Americas. That area of Lower Manhattan represents, it's a site of power, a site of commerce, a site of exchange. And we played a very vital role in maintaining the commerce and economy of then New Amsterdam under the Dutch and later New York under the British.
Europe was able to benefit from it. The fact that they underdeveloped Africa as they divided it up and went into Africa and utilizing the people under the same conditions that the American blacks or blacks in Europe were utilized to the benefit of white fortune.
So in digging, they essentially not just found the remains of our ancestors, but they subconsciously or unconsciously or unwittingly allow their voices to be heard.
Primary aim is to help people recover the lost history, the lost ancestors.
I mean, think about it. We've got layers and layers of history, of time, of knowledge that has been suppressed in that space.
You can never reach a man if you don't speak his language. If a man speaks the language of brute force, you can't come to him with peace. Why, good night. He'll break you in two.
So we're talking about people who garner their wealth, the diamonds and the gold that bolster the economy of the Western world is stolen primarily from Africa at a great cost of life to African peoples. And so the Africans who live among them, to control us, they must make sure they control our minds, our thinkings, our values, our interests, and our principles. And the primary way to do that is to deny you access to your culture, information, deny you access to historical information, deny you access to technical skills that would be necessary to develop our societies.
Because only we can free ourselves, and we need to do so through a knowledge of ourselves.
If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. They won't even admit the knife is there.
Post means past. Trauma means there's an injury that was inflicted upon you. And slavery was a process of genocide and incarceration that was imposed by the military will of one people upon the African peoples. And syndrome means that the injury the damage from that injury is continuous because no healing process was ever put in place. Not even a recognition of the injury has been made on the part of those who inflicted that injury. And the injury has been so damaging that those who were injured don't even realize they're injured. And so when we say post-slavery trauma, we're saying since slavery, post meaning something that happens after, since slavery, the injury that was inflicted upon Africans is continuing to cripple them. That's the simplest way to put it.
We were once objects of commerce. We were sold. Okay. When Africans were captured and again forcefully brought here, there was a huge intellectual brain drain. It wasn't, the kinds of criminals, the flakes, people who were not of substance who were brought to the Americas, but people who had tremendous knowledge.
African people in the Western Hemisphere are some of the most well-trained, technocratized Africans on the planet Earth. Africans on the continent have retained and hold our culture intact. We need our culture, we need our trained, skilled population, we need our natural resources working together in a triad called economic, politics, and culture. That triad has to be based on an African cultural imperative. Within the context of that culture is your spiritual system and your ideology.
But even being here, that wasn't enough. There were umpteen attempts made to suppress our knowledge, to keep us illiterate, to keep us disengaged, to keep us divided. And unfortunately, there were times in our histories where we did that to ourselves. But this idea of commerce and the role that we play, this idea of reparations, is a critical one.
We invested 310 years of slave labor, 310 years, every day of which your and my mother and father worked for nothing. Not 8 hours a day. There was no union in that day. They worked from sun up until sundown, from can't see in the morning until can't see at night. They never had a day off. And on Sunday, they were allowed to sit down and sing about when they died, they wouldn't be slaves no more. When they died.
This business about it happening so long ago, that doesn't fly with me. And it shouldn't fly with anyone here, because we're still suffering the consequences of that. People wonder, well, how come them Africans can't get themselves together? Well, because you've extracted not only material goods from them, but intellectual goods.
Your role is reparations. You know what I mean? If you recognize it's a wrong that's been done and it's still wrong, then you gotta be on the forefront of the reparations question. As a white person, when you know that you benefited through your history, through your legacy, through your
you brought us over here as slaves. You're gonna keep us here, and you're mad because we want some of our own? Why don't we just take everything that belongs to us? How could you be given freedom by the same person that made you a slave? That means you don't know what freedom really is.
It's global, it's powerful, it's scary. If you've ever been to France, you go to any of the arrondissements, those places are incredible, but did you think they got there by themselves? You walk down Wall Street, those beautiful banks and beautiful buildings. You go to the capital, Washington, D.C. in this country. Do you think those buildings got there by themselves? Do you think those paved streets got there by themselves? No, we built them. We built them. And so to demand some sort of recourse, to demand payment, is something that will essentially take this notion of the New World Order and just topple it over on its head.
We must raise our race above the degradation we have been put into by the enslavement of our people and the colonization of our people on the continent. Since Malcolm came on the scene and stood up in such a courageous way, he's become the symbol for anybody that's talking about freedom. He's become the symbol for anyone that's talking about controlling your natural resources in Africa and anywhere else in the African world. He's become the symbol of freedom for everybody who wants to claim their identity from Africa as Africans and lose the identity imposed on them by the Europeans. So whenever any of these issues is raised, and they're raised constantly all over the African world, Malcolm X's name always come up as a symbol that stood for these things.
There's a worldwide revolution going on. It goes beyond Mississippi. It goes beyond Alabama. It goes beyond Harlem. What is it revolting against? The power structure. The American power structure? No. The French power structure? No. The English power structure? No. Then what power structure? An international Western power structure.
The people have to realize what the economic stakes are. They have to realize what it is that really makes this country go around. It's economics, and if you don't have your economics established, then somebody else can establish it for you and have you working for them. So in order to avoid that, basically what you have to do is have the wise mind. You know, when you're working, when you're on the plantation, you got to save your funds, you know. You can't throw it all back to the white man. You can't keep throwing it into Macy's and things like that. You got to know what your necessities are. You know your spiritual needs first of all, you know, and then material needs will naturally come as part of your spiritual needs.
My identity is not determined by my material possessions. I live by that. And one of the things that I encourage so many of our people to understand is that it's not the clothes on your back or the car that you drive that identifies your essence. It's what you say, it's what you think, it's what you do.
That's definitely the truth. A lot of people are for the movement, but they're not moving. A lot of people talk, but they don't listen. They don't study, they don't do the research. A lot of people listen, and when they talk, it's somebody else's words. There's a lot going on. It's supposed to be a movement going on, and not too many people are moving. I don't understand it. I'm one of those people. Seriously, I need to move. I need to motivate myself and get to the next level, and this is my advice to you. This is why I'm telling you. This is just my opinion that a movement is going on, whether people want to move or not. Spiritually, we all owe it to our ancestors. And this universe is going to make sure that we move in that direction and do what we have to do. That's why everybody has their own story. You have to figure out what you're here for, master the style that you need to get to the next level, to live consciously, and then get it executed.
One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it.
A unification of African people around the control of economic, politics, and culture. That was the key. That you have to be united in order to control the economics that you produce. You have to be united in order to have a politics that speaks to the interests and the protection of your people and their natural resources. You have to be united to restore your culture as your primary ethical, moral, and spiritual tools for guiding your politics so that it can determine the best use of your economics.
Africans in the Western Hemisphere today have developed more race pride, and as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together, and your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat.
So thinking globally, acting locally means that, as Malcolm was saying there, you have to understand the structures. You have to understand how the money works. You have to understand. But watch this. He also said that the same thing that's been used to oppress us can be the same thing that's used to free us, i.e. the media and the use of media by becoming media savvy and media literate.
When you control the information flow in the world, you control what the rest of the world thinks. And no one can deny that in the African world, 99% of the information flow is controlled by Europe, America. And until Africa get control of the information that informs and instructs them on how to see reality and form worldviews, they will be under the dominance of Europe and America.
If I smack the shit out of you for 10 years and then for the 11th year I decide, you know what, I'm not going to smack you today. You ain't break my hand. I can still smack you whenever the I want to. Malcolm wanted to break that hand. And that's why he represented danger. And that's why he represented freedom.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, to be or not to be. He was in doubt about something.
whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
A lot of our ancestors started things that they didn't complete that we're finally completing now, hundreds of thousands of years ago. But as long as we start the process, the sooner it'll be done. We could start now, it may end 500 years from now, but the fact that we started now instead of next year, it bought us another year. We could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives in that 1 year. And that's the best thing we need to do, is just start immediately. And we must start within ourselves first before we branch out and try to help other people.
I mean, any black person, you have to know right away, just from the fact that you're alive, that there are people who died so that you could be here, you know, from Harriet Tubman's people, you know, Nat Turner and them, through to Malcolm X, you know, in between there, Marcus Garvey, you know, Huey Newton. I mean, just the whole century is filled with people who were leading this revolutionary struggle just for us to be able to be perceived as human beings. Now, if that alone does not motivate you enough to want to get up and really try to do something with your life, now that you have that opportunity, I don't know what would.
I hope I haven't put anybody on the spot. I'm not intending to try and stir you up and make you do something that you wouldn't have done anyway.
In the UK, you've got people fighting. In Jamaica, you got people fighting. In Nigeria, you got people fighting. In New York, you got people fighting. In Caracas, Venezuela, you got people fighting. In Puerto Rico, all of these African people are fighting for the same thing, for self-determination. Self-determination and human rights. And hopefully, as I see in the current movement, the movement to create the African Union, and for the African Union to create a sixth region which involved the diaspora, they're talking about a legitimate working Pan-Africanism around the basis of economic politics and culture.
I pray that you will grow intellectually so that you can understand the problems of the world and where you fit into in that world picture.
Many people fall for the dollar and lose their lives and their souls in the process. And tens of thousands, and I dare say maybe millions of people are going to suffer in the coming decades because of our inability or unwillingness to act as we should have.
And I pray that all the fear that has ever been in your heart will be taken out. And when you look at that man, if you know he's nothing but a coward, you won't fear him. If he wasn't a coward, he wouldn't gang up on you.
You won't be able to use everything from my generation, but you come to my generation to get what you can use to make sure you're doing the appropriate thing in your generation. There is millions of Malcolm X's. We simply have to pay attention to them.
During the years that Malcolm was incarcerated, he read material which opened his mind to a new way of seeing himself. He went in as a thug, a drug dealer, a hustler, part-time pimp, came out as a born-again African. So what Malcolm was able to do, each and every person has the capacity to do. The question is, do we have the desire?
Malcolm is God having a human experience. And whenever you meet a God having a human experience, he doesn't die. He just leaves his body because the conditions for living in it has drastically changed to his disadvantage. And so who knows where God's living, what body is manifesting itself. God manifested as Malcolm X and did extraordinary things.
You don't have a revolution in which you love your enemy. You don't have a revolution in which you're begging the system of exploitation to integrate you into it. Revolutions overturn systems. Revolutions destroy systems.
Malcolm X, the black shining prince with kingly hair. His speeches ran circles around the government in Harlem squares. Malcolm X rescued Brother Hinton Johnson and made sure that he was transferred from the police station on 123rd Street to the hospital so they could tend to his injuries from the extreme brutality. Malcolm X represented the fifth pillar and put faith inside the community. Malcolm X, one of the most inspirational speakers you'll ever hear. Malcolm X. I want to speak to the Secret Serviceman that was seen running away from Malcolm X. The Secret Service files need to be Malcolm X. Malcolm X. Everybody knows him as Malcolm X the man, but we should also know him as the husband of Queen Betty Shabazz. How can you properly honor the king without honoring the queen? She was a supportive wife. She shielded her family at the scene. Malcolm X. Malcolm X, the tongue of a prophet. They complain about the youth hooded up on the street corners with antisocial behavior antisocial. Well, media, an overseer, come over here. Let me take you back to the early 1920s so all of your reptilian, serpentillian surveillance cameras can get the full picture. Omaha, Ku Klux Riders all hooded up with antisocial behavior antisocial, Ku Klux all hooded up, frightened a pregnant mother. The mother that was pregnant and was frightened was Malcolm's mother, called Louise from Grenada, shouting out for his father. They were shouting out for his father, but he wasn't present. When they came, he wasn't there. Earl Little, Malcolm's father, the prominent Baptist minister preacher, was on his way home from preaching elsewhere where he was preaching. They smashed windows were smashed. They instilled fear was instilled, and when they rode off into the distance with their flaming torches flickering in the air, Earl Little came back. And then he moved his family to Milwaukee, and then it happened again, but this time, Malcolm's father was in. He ran out after them. He began shooting after those who attacked him. But nothing much has changed since then, because only he was brought in for questioning. Prejudice around this time was escalating, and around this time many were killed and never saw court cases. That's why Malcolm's father slept with a pistol under his pillowcases. As a devout Marcus Garveyite, Earl Little made sure his meetings would end with the words, up you mighty race, accomplish what you will. Now feel the pugilistical syllables flow through your meridians, and super dance beat with the cowrie shells, telling you that before Malcolm's conception, he was persecuted like King Herod looking for the son of a carpenter. All leaders are crucified, but their words will never die. Their words will never die.